This is the Financial Intelligence Podcast brought to you by the UK Financial Intelligence Unit. The UK FIU has a national remit to analyse information on economic crime received through suspicious activity reports. All views expressed by panellists on the podcast are their own and not necessarily those of the UK FIU. Hello and welcome to this episode of the UK FIU's Financial Intelligence Podcast. Today's episode is focused on Organised Immigration Crime, or OIC. My name is Emma Jane Turner, and I am a Reporter Engagement Manager with the UK FIU. I'm joined today by my colleagues Rich Farrell and Scott Griffin. Rich is an Operations Manager within the National Crime Agency and is the strategic lead in relation to organised immigration crime illicit finances. Rich started his NCA career within the UK FIU before moving to the Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking Unit to lead their response to MSHT illicit finance. Scott Griffin is a manager in the illicit finance team within the National Economic Crime Centre. He is a member of the Expert Laundering Evidence Cadre, which is a cross-law enforcement group of volunteers who are experienced in money laundering and are trained as expert witnesses. Thank you both for joining us here today. First of all, I'm just going to come to each of you and get you to give us a little bit more background about who you are and what you do, and how it is relevant to the topic we are talking about today. So, Rich, I will come to you first.
Thank you, Emma Jane. For the last several years, I've worked extensively with law enforcement across the UK and Europe to improve their collective ability to effectively tackle MSHT illicit finance. I've worked closely with the UK's regulated sector to improve their ability to detect, deter and disrupt modern slavery and human trafficking, most notably through a JMLIT cell focused on sexual exploitation. Having moved to the OIC threat in the last year, I'm now the lead for a European-wide operational action focused on OIC illicit finances, and I'm also the co-chair of a newly formed JMLIT OIC cell, which we'll hear more about later.
Excellent, thanks for that. And Scott, do you want to give our listeners a little bit more background about you?
Thanks, EJ. Prior to joining the NCA, I had a career in policing, where I was experienced in financial investigation, money laundering, bribery, and corruption investigations. Part of my role was to engage with internal and external organisations and to deliver upskilling sessions on money laundering. My presentation topics include criminal abuse of informal value transfer systems such as Hawala and Chinese underground banking. I've been lucky enough to present the topics at conferences or training sessions in South Africa, Canada, Taiwan and around Europe. I delivered a training session in March this year to Latin American senior prosecutors on how IVTS works and can be abused. CEPOL, the European Union body for training law enforcement, used me to deliver training for them. I recently spent some time in Greece delivering training to Armenian, Ukrainian and Georgian prosecutors and police who were learning about how to combat organised immigration crime.
Excellent, thank you. Some really great experience and background here relevant to our topic. So let's get into it. I think most of our listeners will be aware of the fact that the government has a priority to address and tackle organised immigration crime in the UK. So, Rich, can you give us a little bit more background about the NCA's role in tackling OIC?
Of course. The NCA more broadly leads the UK's fight to cut serious and organised crime by protecting the public and targeting and pursuing those criminals who pose the greatest risk to the UK. Tackling OIC remains a top priority for the NCA, and we're putting more resource into targeting the criminal networks behind it than ever before. We are determined to do all we can to target, disrupt and dismantle them wherever they operate. The NCA leads the law enforcement response to the organised criminality behind the trafficking and smuggling of people impacting upon the UK, whether that be through ferry traffic, unaccompanied freight, small boats or other means. We focus on investigating the top-tier, highest-harm criminal networks. We also work with partners including immigration enforcement, policing and overseas law enforcement to support their investigations with our unique capabilities and tactics. The agency has around 80 ongoing investigations into networks or individuals in the top tier of organised immigration crime or human trafficking, those inflicting the highest harm and those who are most difficult to reach. These investigations target groups involved in small boats criminality or activity that facilitates it, for example through the supply of boats and engines or the laundering of criminal profits. Organised immigration crime is an ever-evolving and very dangerous threat. Almost 80 people died attempting to cross the Channel in small boats in 2024. Organised criminality sat behind each one of those deaths. It is the NCA's absolute priority in all our investigations, at all times, to protect life, even if this is to the detriment of a criminal justice outcome. While the majority of this criminality sits outside of our jurisdiction, there is still likely to be hundreds of individuals in the UK engaged in or assisting with OIC, such as brokers or payment facilitators. UK-based criminals are likely to be those enabling this threat, and we are working with policing and immigration enforcement to tackle those involved.
Thanks for that really good and clear overview for that, Rich. You mentioned the cross-border nature of this crime, which we are going to come back to later, but you also mentioned payment facilitators. And this is where I'm going to bring Scott in, because our audience, this is the UK FIU podcast, we're interested in the illicit finance side specifically of OIC. So Scott, can you talk us through the financial flows and how money moves in relation to this particular crime?
Yes, there isn't a one-size-fits-all in relation to this type of criminality. For instance, I used the expression informal value transfer systems earlier. But what does that mean? Well, informal value transfer systems, or IVTS as it's commonly known, are methods of moving value from one place to another. Some people may know one of these systems as Hawala. Hawala has become shorthand for IVTS within law enforcement and a lot of communities, but is merely one version. So how does Hawala work? Well, a lot of people in the world do not have access to banking facilities, and IVTS or Hawala is often used by those communities. To give you an example, you may have a migrant worker who's working in a foreign country and is paid cash. He wants to remit money to his family back home, and his family live in a remote village where there are no banking facilities. The customer approaches a money exchanger known as Hawaladar. The Hawaladar knows another Hawaladar in the same area as the worker's family. Between the Hawaladars, they agree that the transfer can take place. The worker hands his cash over to the Hawaladar, and the Hawaladar in the country where the worker's family are pays out to the family. Now, what's really important is that no money has actually moved. The cash handed over by the worker is still in the original country. What's really important to understand with IVTS is that no money moves. It is only the responsibility of value. Now, the Hawaladars, because somebody's up, somebody's down, they will balance their books later.
Thanks for that, Scott. And if anyone wants a bit more of a description of how IVTS works, there is a really good description and diagram in the NCA's National Strategic Assessment, which is available on our website. So there's probably some questions in our audience, Scott, about IVTS and whether or not it is illegal and how it is used for criminality like OIC.
I think it's important to state that IVTS or Hawala is legal in the UK if the business is registered with HMRC and abides by the money laundering regulations. That includes identifying customers and making and keeping appropriate records relating to the transactions. The overwhelming majority of IVTS operators in the UK comply with the regulations. However, unfortunately, there's a small minority of operators who do not. By avoiding the MLRs, criminals move their illicit profits anywhere in the world by transferring the value using IVTS.
Great, thanks, Scott. That's really clear now that IVTS in and of itself is not illegal, but there are illegal practices and illegal examples of it. So looking at that, the government has stated it wants the financial enablers of OIC to be tackled. So can you explain how migrants pay the smugglers for their services?
I think some of the cases I've seen is IVTS / Hawala has been used. There's some cases where payment's been made up front and it's held in escrow until the destination is reached. Now, just to give you a bit more detail, I'll explain to the listener what that means is payment is often made to a Hawaladar by a migrant or a migrant's family, and the smugglers are informed that that's taking place. The funds are then held until the migrant reaches the intended destination. And once this is done, they contact the Hawaladar, who arranges for the funds to be released to the smugglers. I've also seen, this is a bit more nefarious, is working off the debt. The migrant is moved on in stages, and in each stage they have to work to pay off their debt or to pay for the next part of the journey. And that they're often working, or they always tend to be working in the black economy. So you end up finding them working in cannabis farms and grotty kitchens, car washes. And it's a term that's been used, debt bondage. They basically cannot move, cannot do anything. The passports are taken from them, and until they've earned enough to allow the smugglers to move them on to the next part of the journey. And then there's the simple one of paying up front. The migrants pay the criminal gangs up front to facilitate the travel. Now, the danger with that is once they've handed over the money, the smuggling gangs have got no real incentive to get them to their intended destination. They've got their money. They don't care. And I think that's very often when we see some of these tragedies occurring, because the smuggling gangs do not have an incentive to get them to the ultimate destination because the money's already in the pocket.
If I can just jump in there, Scott, I think what I'd add there is that there's a clear correlation between the price that a migrant pays to come to the UK and the risk that is then associated to it. So those that we see crossing the English Channel on small boats that are in a completely insufficient condition to be going out on those seas, they are charged a smaller amount in relation to others that are potentially coming in through air facilitation. You can see in those two methods of entry to the UK the risks that would be associated to it, and how the more you pay, the less risk there is to your travel to the UK.
Great, thanks both. I think what's become really clear here, and I think is clear from the very nature of this crime, is that it is a cross-border crime. So, Rich, you mentioned earlier work with partners overseas. Can you tell us more about how the NCA is working with international partners to address this threat?
Of course, much of the criminality involved in organised immigration crime lies outside the UK. So we've built up our intelligence sharing effort with law enforcement partners in France, Belgium, and further beyond. This includes having NCA officers based in those countries, sharing intelligence and working side by side on joint investigations. This approach is bringing operational results with arrests and prosecutions. We work with these law enforcement partners overseas to actively target supply routes for boats, engines, and maritime equipment, denying these to criminal groups, denting their profits, and disrupting their activity. Our assessment is that this is having an impact, driving up the costs of boats and engines and eating into the profits of the organised crime groups. As we know, organised immigration crime is an international problem, and we continue to generate and share intelligence with international partners. This intelligence has been directly responsible for preventing crossings and arresting facilitators both in the UK and overseas. The NCA has increased the number of officers overseas working against the threat with partners, including a 50% uplift in the number based within Europol tackling organised immigration crime. We target and disrupt organised crime groups at every step of the route, in source countries, in transit countries such as Greece, Italy, North Africa and Turkey, near the UK border in France and Belgium, and those operating inside the UK itself. We have also taken the fight against OIC further upstream to locations like Iraq and Libya, working with partners to target criminal networks who are impacting the UK but are operating in places where they previously thought themselves untouchable. We also use the full suite of powers at our disposal to disrupt organised crime groups, pursuing other methods when a criminal justice route is not possible, and we are seeking to disrupt OIC business models through targeting their social media offering, their supply routes for equipment, and their financial flows.
Great, thanks for that, Rich. It sounds like there's some really incredible collaboration and partnerships going on between the NCA and wider international law enforcement to address this threat. Coming to you now, Scott, our listeners are probably also really interested in what does OIC illicit finance look like? What should they be looking out for in their businesses, in their work, in order to identify where this criminality might be happening?
I wish I had a one-paragraph answer to that. But the truth is, when it comes to professional money launderers, they don't care where the money's come from, whether that's from drug trafficking, fraud, human trafficking, or people smuggling. In their mind, they are providing a service. That makes it very difficult to define what the source criminality is. However, I've got a couple of examples which the listeners might be interested in relation to IVTS, where we did link it to people smuggling. In one case, I saw a legitimate UK company sell machinery to a company in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. The Iraqi company paid the funds to a money service business in Iraq. The UK company received the full value of the sale into their bank accounts over several transactions from several UK bank accounts. On investigation, these payments were from Kurdish residents in the UK who had engaged the services of an unregistered MSB with the intention of sending funds to the KRI, or the Kurdistan region of Iraq. The UK residents transferred the money as instructed to the UK bank account of the machinery seller. They didn't question why. At the same time, the value of the transfers was paid out in Iraq as they expected. So they were happy. They didn't question it. They paid money in. It popped out at the other side. This is what we call third-party payments. Now, that's something that some listeners might be aware of. It's something that they might see if they have to, if they work in the regulated sector and they're looking at certain accounts. That might be a red flag. On another case, I saw mention of travel in the narrative on the money transfer. In that case, the telephone messages, what we saw was a migrant's family based in the UK that had transferred money to the organised crime group and had put the word travel in the transfer narrative. This caused an angry response from the crime group who believed it could be flagged up by the authorities. So that's just one example of where they're trying to hide their tracks, but that was one example where the migrant's family had made a mistake by putting travel down. So there's so many different ways it can happen. But what I would say to anyone who's in the regulated sector, it will be difficult to spot illicit finance in relation to organised immigration crime. Just think of it as any form of an informal value transfer service that might be taking place. And if they feel that they need to report it, then they should report it. I think what that shows is that the professional money launderers are aware of the tactics that law enforcement and financial institutions use, and they will use every opportunity to exploit any vulnerabilities in the systems to allow illicit financial flows to flow.
Great, thank you. I think that's really helpful to understand that, or from a financial institution's perspective particularly, it might not look specifically like OIC, but it may still look like, general suspicious activity might look like, as they're used to seeing money laundering look in general, and it's not really required for that reporter or that institution to be able to point it to OIC necessarily, but they should always obviously consider their reporting obligations when it comes to suspicions of money laundering.
Oh, absolutely correct, yeah.
Great, thank you. So we've almost come to an end of our episode, but before we go, I want to talk to you, Rich, a little bit more about how the NCA is working in partnership with the private sector to address the organised immigration crime threat, specifically looking at illicit finance. So can you talk us through some of the work that we're doing there?
At the agency, we realised that working alongside the private sector is crucial to effectively tackling the organised immigration crime threat. The Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Taskforce, OIC cell, is co-led by the NCA and Western Union and launched in early July. It's the first of its kind, solely focused on the threat of organised immigration crime, illicit finance, here in the UK, and brings together over 25 subject matter experts from a wide range of partners, including the financial sector, MSBs, high street banks, and fintech firms, alongside UK law enforcement and government agencies. This project demonstrates our collective commitment to tackling organised immigration crime, illicit finances, and ensuring that this pernicious crime has no place in our country. The JMLIT OIC cell has two key aims. Firstly, to improve understanding of the signs of organised immigration crime within financial data and thereby strengthening the detection and reporting of it. And secondly, using existing legislation, we will identify lines of inquiry in both new and ongoing law enforcement investigations and intelligence developments. This will enhance the law enforcement response to organised immigration crime, illicit finance. The JMLIT OIC cell will last for between 6 to 12 months, and if there are any institutions that are listening who would like to know more about the cell, they can contact the UK FIU.
Great. Thanks for that, Rich. It's really good to hear that there is a cell specifically focused on this, and we look forward to hearing more about what comes out of that cell. As Rich mentioned, if there are any institutions listening that would like to know more about the work of the cell and possibly being involved in it, please reach out to the UK FIU's reporter engagement team. You can email us on ukfiuengagement@nca.gov.uk, and we'll be able to put you in touch with Rich and his team. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I want to thank Rich and Scott for joining me here today and for their really insightful inputs.
No, you're welcome. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, EJ.
You're welcome. To keep up to date with the latest UK FIU podcast, magazines and other guidance products, please visit the NCA website. Find the UK FIU on X and also on LinkedIn. You'll also find the full collection of UK FIU podcasts on Spotify and other major streaming platforms. Thank you for listening. I've been Emma Jane Turner, and this has been the UK FIU Financial Intelligence Podcast.